Finding parts to repair an older MacBook like this one isn't a particularly easy task. If you have a recent Apple Silicon Mac, you can go on Apple's parts store and pay their exorbitantly expensive prices, but for something older like this, Apple never sold those parts. So you basically are stuck buying used parts that you can find from third parties. But recently, a new market for cheap parts has opened up on Amazon. You can now find a ton of components to repair or upgrade your MacBook, oftentimes with 2-day free shipping. But are they any good? Well, to find out, I bought a whole bunch of them, and today we're gonna be testing out cheap Amazon MacBook parts. Without any further ado, let's get to unboxing to see what I bought. So first up, we've got an SSD upgrade. This is 512 gigabytes. Then we've got a trackpad. Oh, look at that. It comes with the ribbon cable. We have a battery. This one should be pretty interesting. And look at that, it even comes with tools. That's pretty nice. And finally, this is the big one, a display. And what's really got me wondering is, where do these parts come from? This one in particular, I mean, this looks like an actual Apple display. Let's get to the bottom of this right after a word from today's video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Anker Prime Thunderbolt 5 docking station. Targeted towards the latest generation M4 Apple Silicon MacBooks, this docking station is the ultimate Thunderbolt 5 solution. With a Thunderbolt 5 upstream port and 2 Thunderbolt 5 downstream connections, you can daisy chain this into other TB5 devices, allowing you to unlock massive data transfer speeds. Transferring a 150 gigabyte file takes just 25 seconds over Thunderbolt 5. It also unlocks support for dual 6K displays, as well as 140 watts of power to your MacBook. Anker Prime Thunderbolt 5 docking station is also the first to integrate gallium nitride materials in a docking station, adding to its revolutionary cooling system with its powerful built-in cooling fan and smart thermal algorithms to maintain full performance without throttling. And it also means that despite its tiny form factor, it does not need an external power supply. If you want to know more about it, go ahead and search for Anker Prime TB5 right now, and if you order now, you can participate in a quiz on Anker's official website to have a chance to win an Anker Prime mystery box for free. To learn more about Anker Prime, check out the link in the description below, and of course, a big thanks to them for sponsoring the channel. Now let's get back to the video. So here's all the parts that we're going to be testing out today, and all of these were pretty cheap. I paid $38 for the trackpad, $37 for this battery, $44 for the SSD, and $115 for the display. Now the irony is I only spent 90 bucks on the MacBook Air, so I've spent more than twice that on these parts, and none of them are even real. Although let's investigate a bit further, because 2 of these parts I know are gonna be fake. You can't buy an OEM Apple battery or an OEM Apple SSD, certainly not on Amazon. And I'm actually genuinely quite curious to try this SSD, because the thing is, Apple SSDs from 2013 to 2017, depending on the model, are they're an NVMe standard, but they use a different connector. Now, in the past, what you would do is just buy an adapter, but more recently, manufacturers have been making SSDs that use the Apple pinout. So it's a normal NVMe with the Apple connection, which should allow for more seamless operation. So I'm very curious to see how this thing performs. And then the battery here, you obviously can't buy OEM batteries from Apple. So we have to settle for something like this. And at $37, it's hard to imagine people would want to spend a whole lot more than this on a battery for such an old MacBook. I do like that it comes with the tools that you need. We've got 2 screwdrivers and a little scraper guy to help pull the battery out, and we are going to be using these tools because I want to see if this is something you could actually do at home yourself. But now I want to focus on the screen and the trackpad. These were really interesting to me because I'm not aware of anybody who's making replica Apple trackpads. Honestly, you guys, I'm a little bit stumped so far. We're gonna have to compare to the actual trackpad in our MacBook Air, but this certainly feels more or less like what you would expect a real Apple trackpad to be. Now, it came with this ribbon cable, and I'm assuming that this is not an actual Apple ribbon cable. Yeah, honestly, it does feel a little bit flimsy, and this is something that you could probably fake a lot more easily than the actual trackpad itself. So very curious to try that. But what I'm most curious about is this display, because it seems to be like a new part. I don't see any signs of wear on it. And then let's take a look at the back here. While we do have an Apple logo, that's already kind of interesting. Now, my first suspicion was that this is just a used part, but it is in really, really flawless condition. And the screen also doesn't have any markings on it. But the closer I look, the more I'm starting to notice that there are little things off about this. The area around the camera here, the metal looks kind of soft. And I'm also noticing that the rubber gasket that goes all the way around the display, it doesn't fit quite right. Down here at the bottom, the gasket is really loose. Like I can actually fit my finger underneath that and get kind of underneath the bezel. That is very weird. I am impressed with the number of tools that you get. I think this might actually be more than we need to do this repair. They're definitely a little cheap though. All right, so let's get started by opening up our MacBook Air. I'm gonna use the tools that came with the battery. These actually, oh wait a minute, they're magnetized. Look at that. I wasn't expecting that for 36 bucks. These things are pretty simple, just 5 screws, and then we can use our pizza scraper here, disconnect the battery like so. Actually, we don't even need our pizza scraper, it just lifts right out. Now straight away, just eyeballing it, I think that our OEM battery feels a little bit heavier. So unsurprisingly, I don't think the density of lithium in this new one for 36 bucks is gonna be that great. But more importantly, we now have access to the trackpad. And our Amazon one does look pretty similar. So let's go ahead and remove that. So first thing we'll do is disconnect the ribbon cable because we have a new one of those. And then we have this other ribbon cable, and that's actually for the keyboard, which plugs into the trackpad, and then they both go into the logic board. And the actual trackpad itself is just a couple of Phillips head screws, so we'll go ahead and pull those out. Oh God, that's completely just stripped out. Why did they have to use Phillips? This is why they invented Torx. Oh, there we go. I hate stupid Phillips head screws in places they're not supposed to be. Those are completely stripped. But hey, look, at least we got it out. So here is our original and here is our Amazon trackpad, and I think that they're the same. I'm looking at every single component on the board here, including the QR code positioning, the text on that, the chips themselves, the PCB, it's got that classic matte black Apple aesthetic. So I think this is just a regular Apple trackpad that's being repackaged with a fake ribbon connector, which means that theoretically this should work completely as normal unless this ribbon cable sucks. All right, and with the trackpad in, let's go ahead and do the SSD. So here is our 256 gigabyte original, and here's our new 512. So let's go ahead and put our battery in, and then we'll do the screen. Time to use our dubious tools to put our dubious screen on this MacBook. Now, the process for doing this is not particularly complicated. It's really simpler than people make it out to be. We just have a couple of connectors. That's the LVDS for the display data, and then we have these two little antennas that connect to our Wi-Fi and Bluetooth card, and those kind of tuck under the logic board so we can deroute them through there. And then under here is the camera connector. So there you go. Good job, buddy. Now, of course, Apple tucks that wire underneath the fan, so we'll have to pull that out. Now we got the big Chungus screwdriver, and typically the way that I like to do screen removals is we take out 2 of the screws on either side, leaving 1. And then you stand the machine up, open the display 90 degrees, and we remove the other screws. Bada bing, bada boom. That's a screen. Goodbye. Now on our new display, we'll go ahead and just adjust those to about 90 degrees, make it a bit easier to put that in. This part is always just kind of awkward. There's no real way around it. Yes. Okay, now we're not going to tighten those because when you close it up, the screen is probably going to be a little crooked. So you want to make sure that you kind of line that up front and back, left and right. We'll route that camera wire. We'll run that antenna underneath the board. Look at that. It doesn't fit at all. What are they doing? This is too long. Well, I guess that's what happens when you buy cheap parts. They don't fit right. Okay, so with everything put back together, we can reconnect the battery and see if it boots. Does this battery have a charge in it? No. It's booting, which means that we haven't actively broken it. That's good. All right, let's go put macOS on this thing and see what's what. So with the MacBook all reassembled, I've installed macOS Sequoia and I've run a bunch of tests to see how our new parts compared to the old parts. And the first thing that I was very curious about is our SSD, because obviously this TimeTech $40 SSD is not a very high-end drive. However, the original 250 gigabyte drive that was installed is 10 years old, so one might imagine that a newer drive would be faster. However, that was not the case. Surprisingly, I noticed that the original SSD was actually noticeably faster than this 512 gigabyte one. But the difference was more noticeable in the write speeds, and I definitely felt that when installing macOS. And also, using an NVMe SSD can sometimes cause some issues with macOS, and I've been noticing that as well, especially with booting up the machine. Almost every single time you power this thing on, it kernel panics or it gets completely stuck on the boot screen. Now, granted, we have a confluence of issues here because I'm using a patched version of macOS on a non-original SSD, so I don't entirely blame the SSD. However, in the past, I have had issues using NVMe drives that are aftermarket in these MacBooks. Now, as for the trackpad, really nothing to report here. I'm pretty sure this is an Apple original part and it feels and operates exactly the same. If you need a new trackpad, honestly, not the worst idea I've ever seen, although you can find them on eBay for cheaper. But now let's talk about the battery, because this is something I was very interested in. First of all, I wanted to see if this is the correct capacity for this model. And sure enough, the system information is reporting 7,200 milliamp hours, which is about what this machine would have shipped with new. And this actually was an interesting opportunity because my original OEM battery was in fully working normal condition. It hadn't degraded as many older MacBook batteries have. So we actually have a benchmark that we can compare it to. I ran a little battery test, just left it running for 5 hours with a YouTube video open. So we went from 100% down to 18. So with the new battery, how did it compare? Well, the battery actually died at about 4 hours, 45 minutes. So it is definitely worse. And the bigger concern that I would have for something like this is longevity. How long will this battery actually last? I took a look at the reviews on this Amazon page, and a lot of people were mentioning that after 12 to 18 months, the battery just completely stopped working altogether. So most likely they're just using extremely cheap materials to construct these cells, and the battery management circuits are just not good. Now, speaking of lower quality materials, let's talk about the display, because I have now examined this a lot more thoroughly, and I think the entire display is a reproduction, including all of the aluminum components. Now, I will say they did a good job. If you're not looking very closely, it does look like a real Apple display, but there are a couple of giveaways. First of all is that camera. I mentioned that when we were unboxing this display, and you can actually see that the area around the camera glass is just a little bit soft. And I noticed that as well on the bottom of the screen. It's gonna be a little hard to show this on camera, but you can see that the real display has a slightly sharper edge. And you can also see machine markings inside that lip. Now, it's hard to see when the screen is installed because it's covered by the bottom of the machine. And the next thing is, of course, the gasket that goes around the display. It doesn't fit quite right and it's a little bit loose. So to me, these are all indications that the housing has been reproduced. And the panel, well, it's also pretty low quality. In fact, there's actually a dead pixel right in the middle of my display. And to be fair, we are comparing a very, very bad panel against a very, very bad panel. These 2015 MacBook Airs have terrible screens. When you look at them side by side, you can definitely see that our new display has worse color accuracy The backlight is very, very uneven. You can see some vignetting around the edges, and it really just looks very, very bad. So let's take these parts one by one and discuss what my recommendations would be. Because honestly, I don't think that you should buy any of these components. Number one, the trackpad. It's a real Apple part, but you can find them cheaper on eBay, so just do that, buy a used part. Same thing goes for the SSD, frankly. I don't really have an issue with using NVMe SSDs in MacBooks like this because you can get large amounts of storage for less money. However, the prices for Apple OEM SSDs have also come down quite a bit. So you could find a used 512 gig SSD that's gonna run a little bit better than one of these cheap Amazon ones. And I would maybe either do that or buy a higher quality Samsung drive and use it with an adapter. And next up, the display. Well, I really can't recommend using a replica part like this. It's low quality. If you're someone like me, you're gonna be able to tell the difference and it's gonna get on your nerves. And really more than any of that, it's the price. This at $115 is more expensive than what you could just go out and buy a used display on eBay for. And sure, it's not gonna be in this perfect of condition, but it's actually an Apple part. And finally, the battery. This one is honestly a little bit more tough because if you go on eBay, you can find used OEM batteries, and that is probably what I would gravitate towards. However, at the end of the day, for 36 bucks, you could get a battery that will hold a charge and that'll last, I don't know, a year or so. And if at the end of the day you have to just replace your battery every year in something like this, where it's just 5 screws, I don't think it's a huge deal. If I were buying a Retina MacBook Pro where you have adhesive that you have to remove, then I would definitely buy a high quality battery because you don't want to do that every 12 months. But in this case, for an old machine, you just want to chuck a battery in and it doesn't matter if it lasts, okay, fine. But I would definitely not use a counterfeit charger because those can actually short circuit and just zap your entire logic board. So, fake battery, okay if you need to do it, but keep in mind that sometimes when these things fail, they will swell up. I've had that happen before and it's not fun. So be wary, but not the worst idea in the world. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on these different parts. Would you use any of these? Have you used any third-party parts to repair an older MacBook like this? And of course, if you found this video helpful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.